The hum of the diesel engine was a constant, almost comforting drone against the vast, inky canvas of the night. Miles bled into miles, marked only by the shifting glow of the dashboard lights and the occasional, fleeting flicker of distant headlights, disappearing into the black. Elias Thorne, a man whose life had been measured in countless stretches of asphalt, gripped the wheel, his knuckles white not from tension but from habit. Another cross-country haul, another deadline looming, another. Week away from a home that felt more like a fading memory with each passing sunrise. He was tired, bone-deep weary, and the thought of an extra 3 hours on this desolate stretch of I-70 was a special kind of torment. That's when the detour sign had appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, a faded yellow beacon promising a shortcut. Route 301, alternate scenic rut. Scenic, perhaps in the daylight, but now under the oppressive blanket of a moonless sky, it felt less like a route and more like an invitation to oblivion. Elias had heard the whispers, the trucker talk, about Route 301, about its unsettling history. They called it the Haunted Highway, a ribbon of forgotten tarmac where trucks vanished without a trace, where the fog clung like a shroud even on clear nights, and where the air itself seemed to hum with the echoes of lost cries. He'd scoffed at it, of course. Superstition for the weak-minded, tales spun by lonely men to pass the endless hours. But the promise of shaving off precious hours, of getting back to a warm bed sooner, was a potent lure. He took the exit, the tires of his 18-wheeler, rumbling over the rough asphalt of the ramp. Immediately, the landscape shifted. The well-lit, familiar highway gave way to a narrower, darker road, flanked by ancient, gnarled trees that clawed at the sky like skeletal fingers. The air grew heavy, damp, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and cold, like old rust or stagnant water. Elias flicked on his high beams, but the light seemed to be swallowed by the encroaching darkness, barely piercing the veil that now descended around him. The fog began subtly, thin tendrils creeping out from the ditches, snaking across the road, like ghostly serpents. Within minutes it thickened, a suffocating milky blanket that reduced visibility to mere yards. The world outside the truck's cabin dissolved into a swirling, monochromatic haze. Elias slowed down, his eyes straining, his grip on the wheel tightening unconsciously. This wasn't just a patch of fog. It felt alive, sentient, pressing in on him from all sides, eager to claim what lay within its embrace. The silence that followed was profound, deeper than anything he'd ever experienced on the road. The constant hiss of the tires on asphalt, the distant drone of other vehicles, all were swallowed, leaving only the rhythmic thud of his own heartbeat. He tried to shake off the growing unease. It was just a bad road, a particularly dense fog. Nothing more. He reached for the radio dial, seeking out some late-night talk show or classic rock to break the oppressive quiet. Static, just a harsh, unrelenting hiss. He tried another station, then another. Nothing. The CB radio, usually a lifeline of chatter and updates, was equally dead, emitting only a faint, hollow crackle, like dry leaves scuttling across stone. A cold knot began to form in his stomach. Losing signal out here, in this pea-souper, felt less like an inconvenience and more like a deliberate act. Then he saw them. 2 pinpricks of light in his rearview mirror. and possibly far away at first, then closer, gaining speed with an unnatural swiftness. Not headlights, not exactly. These were a pale, sickly yellow, pulsating faintly, like dim, distant stars seen through a thick haze. Elias frowned, checking his side mirrors. Nothing, just the endless, swirling gray. He glanced back at the rear view. Again. They were closer still, almost on his tail, yet he heard no engine, no telltale hum of tires on asphalt. It was as if they simply existed behind him, a silent, malevolent presence. He pressed the accelerator, his heart quickening its pace. Whatever it wasn't right. The lights mirrored his acceleration, staying stubbornly just behind him, an unwavering pursuit. He swerved slightly, testing, but they remained fixed, like eyes watching his every move. His breath hitched in, his throat. He was alone out here, truly alone, swallowed by the fog and pursued by what? He gripped the CB microphone, a desperate attempt to break the silence. Anyone out there? This is Elias on Route 301. I got something on my tail, can't make it out. Anyone copy? The response was immediate, cutting through the crackle with chilling clarity. A whisper, not from the speaker, but seemingly from the very air within the cabin. It was low, distorted, like a voice dragged from the depths of a swamp, but undeniably human. You shouldn't be here. Elias froze, his blood turning to ice. He dropped the microphone, his hands trembling. He must have imagined it. The exhaustion, the tension, the creepy road. It was getting to him. He shook his head, trying to clear the phantom sound from his ears. But then it came again, clearer. This time closer, seemingly wrapped around him, vibrating in the very metal of the truck. You are lost? Now? The words weren't spoken. They were felt, a cold tendril of dread curling around his spine. He looked frantically around the cabin, then at the rear-view mirror. The pale yellow lights were now larger, closer, almost blinding in their proximity. They pulsed with an eerie rhythm, as if breathing. He slammed on the brakes, the massive truck shuddering violently as it slowed, skidding slightly on the damp road. He expected the lights to crash into him, to reveal their source, but they simply stopped with him, hovering, maintaining their unnerving distance. Suspended in the thick fog, he stared, his eyes wide with a terror he hadn't known since childhood. This wasn't a trick of the light, wasn't an exhausted hallucination. This was real, and whatever it was waiting. The silence inside the cabin stretched, suffocating, broken only by the ragged sound of his own breathing. He could feel it, an unseen entity watching him, its presence a palpable weight in the cab. He knew with a horrifying certainty that the whispers hadn't come from the radio. They had come from the fog itself, from the road, from the very air, that now felt thick and heavy with unseen eyes. His mind raced, desperately searching for a logical explanation, for a way out. But there was none, only the swirling fog, the silent pursuers, and the chilling realization that he had driven straight into the heart of the legend. This wasn't just a road. It was a trap, and he, Elias Thorne, the cynical, practical trucker, was now caught within its impossible, terrifying embrace. He felt a profound sense of helplessness wash over him, as if the very atoms of his being were being slowly drawn into the oppressive void surrounding him. The cabin lights flickered, briefly plunging him into absolute darkness before sputtering back to life, each flicker like a dying heartbeat. He swallowed hard, his throat dry, tasting metallic fear. He had to move, had to escape, but every instinct screamed that turning back was impossible, and going forward, well, going forward meant going deeper into whatever nightmare this road had conjured for him. The feeling of being watched intensified, a burning pressure behind his eyes, inside his skull, as if an unseen force was trying to pry its way into his thoughts, to consume his very sanity. This was not just a chase. It was an absorption, a slow, agonizing surrender to the road's dark will. The stagnant terror that had seized Elias gave way to a surge of adrenaline, raw and primal. He slammed his foot on the accelerator, the diesel engine roaring to life, churning out a desperate surge of power. The truck lurched forward, tires biting into the damp asphalt, but the pale yellow lights in his rearview mirror were still there, impossibly close, unwavering. They weren't following. They were with him, an extension of the road's dark will. He swerved, veering wildly from one side of the narrow lane to the other, hoping to shake them, to force them to reveal themselves. But they moved with him, perfectly synchronized, like an inescapable shadow. The fog outside intensified, pressing in, becoming a solid, suffocating wall. It was no longer just mist. It felt like a living entity, its tendrils snaking through the air vents, carrying the metallic, cold scent he'd noticed earlier, now laced with something else, a faint, sickly sweet aroma like decaying flowers. The road ahead was a blur, the white lines barely visible, dissolving and reappearing as if the asphalt itself was shifting beneath him. His mind, already strained, began to play tricks. He saw fleeting shapes in the swirling haze, dark silhouettes, that resolved into gnarled trees, only to morph into something else, something hunched and skeletal, before vanishing. Then the whispers returned, no longer just from the air, but from everywhere. They were in the rattling of the truck's frame, in the hiss of the air brakes, in the very thrum of the engine. A cacophony of distorted voices overlapping and merging, barely discernible, yet profoundly disturbing. He heard his name, Elias, drawn out and warped, followed by fragments of sentences impossibly personal. Dot, dot, lost, dot, 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 dot. Like the others, dot, dot, dot. Dot, dot, your way. No turning back, dot, 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 dot. She single quotes, as waiting, dot, dot, asterisk, she. The word pierced through his mounting panic. Who was she? The truck's interior lights flickered again, dancing erratically, mirroring the erratic beat of his heart. The dashboard gauges pulsed, needles twitching wildly, as if the truck was having a seizure. The temperature gauge spiked, then plummeted. The fuel gauge dropped to empty, then sprang back to full, mocking him. Elias slapped the dashboard, cursing, trying to force some semblance of order back into the chaos, but it was useless. He was losing control, not just of the truck's systems, but of his own perception. He tried the CB again, fumbling for the microphone, his hands slick with cold sweat. Is anyone there? God, please, anyone? He heard the click of the button, the faint hiss of static, then a distinct, echoing chuckle that seemed to fill the cab, bouncing off the walls, resonating inside his skull. It was a dry, hollow sound, devoid of mirth, chilling him to the core. You are ours now. The voice whispered, clearer than before, right beside his ear, as if a spectral passenger sat in the seat beside him. Elias screamed. A hoarse, ragged sound ripped from his chest. He lunged for the passenger door handle, but his mind rebelled. What was he doing? He was going mad. He yanked his hand back, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles ached. He was trapped. The whispers became more insistent, weaving around him, each voice a thread in a tapestry of terror. He heard pleading, agonizing cries, the unmistakable sound of distant, echoing screams, then a sudden, horrifying sound that snapped his attention back to the road, a child's sob. He slammed on the brakes again, the truck skidding. What was that? He gasped, peering into the swirling white. A child? Is someone out there? He rolled down the window, the cold, damp air rushing in, carrying with it the scent of decay, stronger now, almost suffocating. He leaned out, straining his eyes, but saw nothing but the impenetrable fog. The pale yellow lights in his rearview mirror pulsed faster, brighter, their rhythm mirroring the frantic beat of his own heart. The air felt heavy, viscous, as if he were breathing liquid fear. He heard the sob again, closer this time, just outside the truck. "Please, help me," a tiny, trembling voice whispered. Elias felt a jolt of something beyond fear, a desperate, protective instinct. He unbuckled his seat belt, his hand reaching for the door handle. Was it a trap? Of course it was a trap. Every fiber of his being screamed at him not to open the door, not to step out into that oppressive void. But the sound of that child's voice, so vulnerable, so lost, was a torment he couldn't ignore. Just as his fingers brushed the cold metal of the handle, the pale yellow lights in his rearview mirror surged, expanding, filling the entire mirror with their sickly glow. And within that light, for a fleeting, horrifying moment, Elias saw it. Not an image, but a presence. A towering, elongated shadow, barely discernible, but undeniably there, standing directly behind his truck, its form rippling like smoke, its outline vaguely humanoid, but grotesquely distorted. It had no discernible features, just an immense, suffocating darkness that seemed to absorb all light, all hope. And from that shadow the whispers emanated, a chorus now, overwhelming and chillingly clear. "She's waiting for you." The child's sob instantly vanished, replaced by a low, guttural growl that resonated through the truck's chassis, vibrating up through his seat, through his very bones. Elias slammed the door, locked down, fumbling with the ignition, desperate to escape. He floored the accelerator, the truck tires spinning for a moment on the damp asphalt before finding purchase. The vehicle rocketed forward, a desperate, blind escape into the unknown. He drove faster than he ever had, pushing the massive truck to its limits, the engine screaming in protest. The road was a twisting, endless tunnel of white, illuminated only by his high beams, which seemed to dim and brighten on their own accord. He glanced at the GPS, desperate for any sign of another road. A town, a sign of civilization, but the screen was just a static-filled mess, occasionally flickering to show a single red dot. His truck, trapped in an endless, featureless gray expanse. The map showed no other roads, no towns, nothing. Just him, alone, on Route 301. He became acutely aware of the road beneath him. It felt different now. Not just asphalt, but something subtly yielding, something that pulsed faintly beneath his tires. He could swear the lines on the road were no longer straight, but subtly curved, shifting, guiding him deeper, twisting him further into its embrace. He'd passed the same gnarled tree 3 times. He was certain of it. The same decaying barn, its silhouette barely visible through the fog, appeared and reappeared, always on his right. He was driving in circles, trapped in a horrifying loop. Panic, cold and absolute, wrapped its icy tendrils around his throat. He wasn't just lost, he was imprisoned. The pale yellow lights were still behind him, no longer just 2, but several, forming a loose, pulsing constellation of dread. They moved silently, perfectly in sync with his every desperate maneuver. He saw movement in his peripheral vision, fleeting dark blurs zipping across the road ahead, impossible shapes darting through the impenetrable fog just beyond the reach of his headlights. He blinked, rubbing his eyes, but they persisted, phantoms of the highway, taunting him, draining his resolve. His reality was dissolving, replaced by a waking nightmare orchestrated by the road itself. He was Elias Thorne, a truck driver, but on this highway he was becoming something else, a captive, a plaything, another lost soul. The suffocating realization pressed down on him. This road didn't just make you vanish. It consumed you, piece by agonizing piece. Elias fought. He screamed, he cursed, he beat the steering wheel until his palms bled, but the road was relentless. The loops tightened, the same gnarled tree, appearing on his right, then his left, then directly in front of him, blurring into a grotesque, mocking grin before he swerved away. The fog was no longer just outside. It was seeping into the cab, thick and cloying, carrying the faint, sweet decay, and now something else, the undeniable scent of ozone, sharp and acrid, like burnt metal in a distant electrical storm. His eyes burned, his head pounded, and the line between what was real and what the road was conjuring for him had completely evaporated. The whispers evolved. They were no longer fragments, but coherent sentences spoken in the voices of people he knew, people he'd loved and lost. He heard his mother's worried tone, his ex-wife's accusatory sneer, even the joyful laughter of his young daughter, twisted and distorted, echoing in the suffocating space. "Why didn't you stay?" His mother's voice pleaded, morphing into a guttural growl. "You chose the road, Elias. You chose us." His daughter's laughter turned into a blood-curdling shriek. Each voice was a barbed hook, tearing at his sanity, reminding him of everything he'd left behind, everything he was losing. The pale yellow lights behind him began to coalesce. Slowly, inexorably, they drifted closer, merging, bleeding into one another. They didn't just illuminate the fog. They seemed to part it, revealing a shimmering, pulsating void behind them. It was a space that devoured light, a vortex of sickly, yellow energy that grew larger, pulsing with a terrifying, silent rhythm, like an immense, malevolent heart. And from within that light, that impossible void, he could vaguely make out shapes indistinct and rippling, like figures trapped beneath a sheet of ice, their forms contorting in silent agony. These were the others, he knew it. The lost, the consumed. And he was about to join them that the truck's interior lights went out completely, plunging the cab into absolute darkness, save for the sickly yellow glow now filling his rearview mirror, reflecting off the glass. He was driving blind, guided, only by the ominous light behind him, which had grown so immense it filled his entire field of vision in the mirror. He pressed the accelerator, but the truck seemed to resist. its engine sputtering, coughing, as if the road itself was draining its power. The steering wheel felt like it was fighting him, pulling him off course, guiding him toward some unseen, inevitable destination. He squeezed his eyes shut for a moment, letting out a raw, desperate cry. When he opened them, the world outside had changed again. The road was no longer asphalt. It was black, glistening like polished obsidian, reflecting the yellow light with an unholy brilliance. The gnarled trees lining the edges now seemed to writhe, their branches twisting into skeletal arms, reaching for him. And in the fog, indistinct faces flickered, appearing and disappearing, their mouths agape in silent screams, their eyes hollow and black. He saw them now clearly for a horrifying instant. The spectral truckers, their rigs reduced to rusted husks, their forms elongated and transparent, their pale, yellow eyes fixed on him. They were everywhere, phasing in and out of the dense white, surrounding his truck like a hungry, silent choir. Then, from the depths of the consuming yellow light behind him, a single voice emerged, cutting through the cacophony of whispers. It was the same dry, hollow chuckle he'd heard before, but now amplified, echoing, resonating in his very bones. "Welcome home, Elias." It was her voice, ancient and vast, chillingly seductive, the entity that governed this cursed stretch of road. He felt a profound alien presence settle into the cab, a cold that seeped into his marrow, chilling him to the core. Desperate. He saw it, a faint, flickering light in the distance ahead of him through the fog. A road sign, half obscured, promising an exit. 1-70 east. Hope, bright and impossible, surged through him. A way out. A chance. He stomped on the accelerator, forcing the dying engine to respond, hurtling the truck towards the light. The spectral truckers shrieked, a sound like grinding, metal and tearing flesh as he burst through their ranks. The road beneath him shuddered, fought back, the obsidian surface rippling and buckling. He drove towards the exit, the yellow light behind him surging forward, gaining on him, consuming the space he had just cleared. The closer he got to the exit, the more the light intensified, burning into his eyes, searing his retinas. He could hear it now, a low, guttural hum that vibrated through the truck, through his very skull. It wasn't a sound. It was a presence, vibrating with a hunger that was ancient and boundless. He burst through the last veil of fog, into what should have been the brightly lit, familiar expanse of the interstate. But there was no interstate. There was only more. Fog, thicker, deeper, stretching into an endless, shifting void. The flickering light he had seen was not a sign, but an illusion, another trap. And directly in front of him, looming out of the swirling white, stood a single, immense, ancient, gnarled tree, its branches covered in a strange, sickly yellow luminescence, its roots twisting like 1,000 grasping fingers. At its base, barely visible, was a small, crudely carved wooden sign, half buried in the damp earth. Route 301, end of the line. Elias screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated horror, as the truck hurtled towards the tree. He yanked the steering wheel, but it was locked, unresponsive. The pale yellow light from behind him swelled, encompassing his truck, his entire world. He felt it then, not an impact, but an absorption, a cold, crushing embrace that seeped into every cell of his body, draining him, dissolving him. He saw his hands on the wheel begin to fade translucent, shimmering. The truck's interior dissolved around him, the metal melting into swirling fog and light. The whispers returned, a chorus of triumphant, echoing voices, all speaking as one, and then a single, clear voice, ancient and vast, whispered directly into his disintegrating mind. "You are home now, Elias." He was no longer Elias Thorne, the weary truck driver. His last coherent thought was of his daughter, her face, her laugh, before it, too, began to shimmer, to fade, absorbed into the blinding, pulsing yellow. He felt himself stretching, elongating, becoming thin, insubstantial. The weight of his truck, the feel of the wheel, the very concept of his body, all vanished. He was light. He was sound. He was a whisper. And now, sometimes on the darkest nights, when the fog rolls in thick and heavy on Route 301, drivers claim to see them. Not just two pale yellow lights, but many, a silent, shifting constellation, hovering in the rear-view mirror, relentless in their pursuit. And if you listen very closely, beyond the hiss of the static and the desperate thrum of your own fear, you might just hear it, a faint, distorted whisper, carried on the damp air, urging you deeper into the haze. Sometimes it's a child's sob. Sometimes it's a frantic plea for help. And sometimes, if you're the unlucky one, it's a dry, hollow chuckle, followed by a voice that knows your name, a voice that promises you'll never return home,